it does me great pleasure to now bring forth a formal introduction of our guest co-host today, Dr. Atira Charles. Dr. Atira Charles and I connected back in maybe 2016, 2017, and I cannot wait for you to have the opportunity to hear from her today. So as I normally do, I will give her a formal introduction, and then we will invite her to come and just share and greet this audience in her own way. Dr. Atira Charles is CEO of the Charles Consulting Group, LLC. She began her academic journey at Florida A&M University, HBCU, where she earned both her BS in finance and her master's of business administration. Dr. Charles immediately started her career in academia after graduating with her PhD in organizational behavior and management from Arizona State University. She's given talks across the United States, including a TED Talk entitled Rethinking Diversity and Inclusion as a Health and Wellness Dilemma. We're going to talk about that today. As one of the most innovative business scholars and practitioners in the country, Dr. Charles's research, consulting, and training facilitation seeks to shed light on and further understand the unique narratives revolving around how individuals manage their differences while striving for personal, professional, and organizational success. Her expertise also focuses on organizational structures and processes that promote positive and inclusionary environments. More specifically, her research and consulting revolve around racial and gender identity management in the workplace, organizational management of differences, and communication and feedback processes with diverse organizations. She created what's known as the Mask Project, a national initiative that documents and uncovers individuals' experiences of wearing the mask. I'm sure we all can identify at work and in life. Dr. Charles also has served as a contributor for Black Enterprise magazine. She also released an audiobook entitled The Art of Unmasking, Peeling Back the Layers to Maximize Personal and Professional Success. So in our own way, Intentional Conversations VodCast community, let's place some love into the chat to welcome Dr. Charles. We appreciate you. Earlier this week when we connected, you were on vacation and you're still in the midst of having to travel. And so we don't take it lightly that you said yes to our invite, and we want you to know that we're grateful. So welcome. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on. It's been a while since we've been able to see each other face to face, but hopefully that changes soon. But until then, we will continue to use our digital spaces to do what we need to do.
Absolutely, absolutely we will. And I'm so glad to be reconnected with you. So I always like to take the time, Dr. Charles, and read people's credentials and their accolades, because I think that it helps us all to understand the lens in which you're showing up to this space. But equally important, I think it's great for us to have a more in-depth understanding of who Dr. Charles is beyond her bio, beyond what we can read about. And so in your own way, just share with us, what are some things that we don't know and we can't find out about Dr. Charles just by reading her bio that may also have implications to how in which you like to approach and show up to this space and this work?
For sure. Thank you for that. So I'm a native New Yorker. That's an identity that definitely matters to me. I think it informs the way I show up in spaces. People have said I show up in a big and bold way. You know, coming from a 6th generation New York family, I'm pretty sure that's true. People also say, I'm surprised you're from New York because you smile so much and you're so nice. So we could talk about stereotypes later, but that's definitely something. I come from a family that also has an entrepreneurial background. So we're about 3 generations of serial entrepreneurs in my family. And I think in the Black community, you know, that says something. And I think that that informs how I show up and the risks that I take in my career and the steps that I take and how I navigate that. I'm a mom of 3 amazing kids. They're all middle schoolers and high schoolers as of next week. So I think I'm officially a TikTok mom. So I tend to be a little social media savvy. I'm related to that. And I'd say the other identity that really matters to me the most is being a friend. Being a friend is really a core identity of mine. And I feel like that identity also leads in my professional world, you know, as well. So, oh, and I love karaoke and Oreos. So.
Oh, that's good to know. Karaoke and Oreos. We love it. Thank you so much. You know, I love the fact that, you know, part of describing who you are, how you show up is that you prioritize a friend. I love that. There's something really warming about that. So anyway, I just wanted to comment. And I share with you, coming from a family and a mindset mindset of entrepreneurialism. That also is in my blood, and it has a lot to do with how I show up as well. So we are connected in that regard.
Yes.
So you and I, as I mentioned in your introduction, it was, I think, 2016 or 2017 when we first connected, and you graciously accepted an invite to serve as a keynote speaker, opening this DEI full day summit. We had maybe 500 or 600 people, and your talk was so riveting. It really commanded the audience, and it left us feeling wanting more. It left us sitting with such important points to reflect on and to try to apply. And so I was so moved by that. I took a moment to source some clips from that actual presentation.
Oh, awesome.
And what I wanted to do was share my screen, because I want this audience to have benefit of hearing just a little bit of what you had to say on that in that presentation. So let me get this up. And I really look forward to this community being able to hear what we all heard and were really impacted by.
Here was Dr. Atira Charles, CEO of Think Actuality, LLC. Here is just a taste of what she shared.
Authenticity is really the process of being aware of the different masks that you have and having a peace about which ones you wear at what times. Because where people have that internal conflict is when they're presenting certain selves, certain identities, certain masks to the world, and they don't have a peace about it. But I want you all to be very clear that there is no way you can empower the people you lead without you feeling like you're bringing all of you to the table in a way that gives you peace as well. When we think certain thoughts, it impacts our behaviors. This isn't debatable, it just is. And so if we can own that reality for ourselves and then own that reality for the people we lead, there's a different level of sensitivity and empathy we're able to have. Because when we've taken our own self-awareness journey, when we're figuring out how to be aware of our own identities, when we're figuring out how to manage our own identities, then we can facilitate the people we lead doing the same thing.
Bill Proudman, CEO.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but oh my gosh.
That girl is good.
She is great. She is absolutely amazing. Yes. And I remember even you had all of us, we had masks on the table and we all had to stand, put our mask on, turn to our neighbor. In some instances, we knew our neighbor. In some instances, that was a very unfamiliar face. And you challenged us all to be incredibly vulnerable, to share some of our concerns and our issues. And it was just beautiful. And so anyway, I took that as a moment that I continue to reflect on. And I just wanted to bring it to this space and this conversation. And so
no, I think, and thank you for that, because, you know, with the work that we do, we speak so much that it's good to sometimes hear the words that you said again. You know, that was years ago. And of course, that's messaging that's consistent. But, you know, if I even think back to that time, you guys, like, as the kids say, you know, I said it with my chest. Like, I tend to be emotional in the way in which I say certain things. And that's usually based off of some experience that I've been having either with clients or something I've been noticing in the world. And I remember at that time, I kept having the experience of people coming up to me after talks and like whispering and sneaking to tell me how they feel. Mm. And I had just gotten so frustrated with the reality that no matter what geography, what industry I was in and working in, people still didn't even feel comfortable speaking in their literal full voice, right? To be able to tell a story that is theirs. And so a lot of that comes from leaders not leading and modeling what that looks like. So I remember very clearly why I was so emotional about that statement that day, because there was an experience I had at another conference earlier that week where I was over it. Like I had just had it with people acting like they want people to be vulnerable and authentic, but then sometimes there being risk attached to it. And then saying, oh, bring your whole self, even though there's 5 risks that predictably can come, right? So we have to make sure that the climate and the culture matches what we're telling people, you know, how we want them to show up. And that consistency matters.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you're getting some really good commentary into the chat. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. I want us to talk about authenticity and action. And because that's language that you often use as part of your platform and your messaging. But what does authenticity and action look like in the workplace?
So authenticity, it definitely requires vulnerability and it definitely requires transparency. And here's the biggest challenge. A lot of times we talk about authenticity at work. I'd even like to take a step out and say authenticity in life.
Yeah.
Because if we're not authentic in our regular lives, then it's almost impossible to say, oh, as soon as I swipe that card into the building, or as soon as I click that Zoom link, all of a sudden I can now practice authenticity. But the reality is also that our society doesn't make it easy either to show up fully, right? I think we've seen that in the last week with Simone Biles, right? Where someone can be transparent, authentic, true to self in a way that I believe is best for her and has been a major signal and modeling for society as a whole, and then get hit with risk, right? And critique and judgment and all of that. And so, we have to be able to do it in both places of our life. But society kind of sends a lot of messaging that says, oh, let me not do that. If someone could do this to the greatest athlete of all time, in many people's opinion, then what would they do to me, manager of blank at XYZ company, right? And that's why we see people not taking, their sick days, and we see people not feeling comfortable, taking their FMLA days, and see people just showing up as like sometimes zombies at work, just so that no one asks the question or judges them or critiques them. And I think we have to push past that. And I think that's at the whole life cycle of life. I think we have to empower our children to be that way, because those children then become the future of our workforce. And so I'm a firm believer that at home, we have to start training up the next generation of our workforce to feel comfortable. And I think what we're seeing with a Simone Biles and a Naomi Osaka, because that is work for them, right? It's the workplace. I think they're modeling to our children that are building who their identities, that it'll be okay. So when I think about the fact that I have a 10th grade daughter, she feels no kind of way saying, Mom, I need a mental health day. Mom, I need space today. Mom, I need, it's like, okay, well, fine then, right? Like as a parent, sometimes it hits you, but I am hoping that 10th grade girl becomes, when she's an intern or when she's a new hire at a company, that she feels just as comfortable to do that same thing. So, we have to empower it at all stages of the work life cycle.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I love that. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit deeper about the voice and voices, because again, that's part of your platform. And you often talk about the implications of people suppressing their voice in different spaces. Again, I want to honor what you're sharing in terms of it's not just about the workplace, it's about just in life in general. So people having to suppress their voice in different spaces. What are the implications of that? And how do you advise people and leaders around those implications? How to lean into the voice?
For sure. So I have something called the unmasked framework. We can talk about a little later, but the U in the first thing stands for use your voice. It's literally all we have, right? Like it's the first thing people hear from us. It's our voice, or if it's our written word, depending on our different ability levels, like whatever our mode of communication is, that's what people have for us and from us. And it leads and it sticks, right? So when if even in an interview, even at the desk at a career fair, right? Like who you present yourself as. And what I have noticed that people present themselves in what we can call the representative at first, and then wonder why there's a lack of fit once they're hired, right? Well, you presented a self that technically aligned, and now you're showing another part of yourself, right?
Yes.
And vice versa. Companies can tend to do the same thing. Oh, yes, we're this. Oh, yes, we're that. And then you get there and you become that authentic self. And it's like, hold on, no, rein it back in, pull it back in. And that becomes confusing, and it becomes tiring and emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I think companies have to be clear with being honest about who and what they are. And then I think employees have to do the same, because, in the scholarly space, we talk about person, organization, fit, right? And that's the fit between a person and the organization, or person supervisor fit. And that's the fit between an employee and their manager.
Right.
Well, it's just like in a relationship, right? You can't say,
Right.
oh, I'm an introvert homebody, and then you're an extrovert social butterfly and wonder why the introvert homebody person you went on a, let's say, date one with is not understanding why you want to go out all the time. It's the same thing, right? It's the same thing in any space that we're in. So we have to use our voice to make clear our expectations, our strengths, our weaknesses, what we tend to lean into, what matters to us. And something else I don't think we talk about enough in the workplace is, what are your non-negotiables? Right? And companies have non-negotiables and people have non-negotiables, but people don't like that word. And I think that especially in this current climate, especially for people of stereotyped and stigmatized identities, we have to get to a place where people are honest about their non-negotiables. And, you know, that's something that's different for everybody. For us, Nika, it may look like we don't take every client. Right. Right. It may look like there's a scope of work and it's like, okay, I could do this, but I don't think you all are ready for that. I could invoice you for it, but you're not ready for it. Right. Like that's what it could look like. Or it could look like an employee interviewing and saying, what is the representation of women of color in your middle management level? And what types of visibility and promotion plans do you have for that population? That's a fair question in 2021 we can ask that would have seemed quote unquote crazy in 2019, 18. And so I think that people have to be empowered to, while we've lived through a wacky wonky world, right, in the last year, it also opened up an opportunity to put things on the table and use our voice related to things that we may not have ever felt comfortable doing before. And so we have to seize the moment and as a pro, right, of what's come with the last year that we've just lived in.
I'm leaping inside right now because so much of what you're saying really resonates with me. And I think that part of the message too needs to be that we are going to have different voices. And sometimes what happens is we will start to classify people's voice and their truth as right, wrong, good or bad, instead of just seeing it as that's their truth. That's their philosophy, not necessarily something that I need to feel like I have to subscribe to. I have choices. And so I like the fact that there was a good bit of accountability on both ends. We have to be self-reflective and know what our non-negotiables are as individuals. And we also have to operate with clarity around understanding other organizations and other people's non-negotiables as well. And then let that inform, how are we going to show up? How are we going to interact and attach ourselves?
Yes.
And
because,
so that.
Because it creates distress.
Yeah.
Right. It creates distress. And that's why, you know, in November 2019 is when I did my TED Talk called Rethinking Diversity and Inclusion as a Health and Wellness Dilemma. And, you know, I was talking to some of my colleagues about it and everyone's like, well, you know, what's making you go that direction? I'm surprised you got your TED Talk opportunity. You're not talking about unmasking as your primary focus. And I said, because again, I go by real time, what I'm kind of the pulse check of what I'm feeling and experiencing in like the 3 months before any talk that I give. And at that time, in my personal life with educated professional friends, I was hearing this as an issue. People were leaving work, taking FMLA, having health issues. Health issues were just everywhere in my life with people who quote unquote have it all together, have the resources to get the help, know all the things. And I'm like, if our community is dealing with this, then what are other communities dealing with, you know, sub-communities dealing with across identity groups? And I said, no, what's happening is this is stressing people out. People are getting angst, right? All this ambiguity and uncertainty is leading to physical, you know, results. And science started showing that as well. A lot of organizational studies around how physiology and bio stats connect to moments of discrimination. And I said, no, if I'm going to get this platform, I have to say the thing. I need to use these 14 minutes to say the things that many people may never feel comfortable saying, so that when people send that link, it's saying all the things related to that. And, you know, it's interesting because that was pre-George Floyd, that was pre-pandemic. And look at the last year and a half we just lived.
Oh my gosh.
At the intersection of diversity, inclusion, health, and wellness. So I'm in a stage now where I'm kind of bringing the video. The talk was November, the video came out January, the world went crazy a month later, right? So I never gave the TED Talk the thought leadership push, right, that I intended to, but I plan on doing that now.
You definitely should. And I will tell you that we have shared it into our chat. And so we certainly want this community to take some time to watch that and share it out with those you think would find value in hearing this message. And I plan to do the same. And so before we move off into another question, I see that Linroy, a community member here, he wants us to dig a little bit deeper into examples of non-negotiables that maybe, so can you kind of comment on that?
Sure. So an example I could say, like in organizations, I'll talk about diversity leaders for a moment, right? So diversity leaders oftentimes are given roles, but not given budgets to do the work. Right. Or given subpar budget. So that's an example, in our lane, our position. But for someone who's working, it may be that if a job doesn't have a flex schedule that you can use, and you have 4 kids under 8 and a grandmother that needs help living at home, then that's not a fit. I don't care what the role is. That will become an issue that you battle with daily. So the way in which I see non-negotiables are things that can create tension or distress for me frequently.
Yeah.
Because if it does that, then it's not worth it. Right. And so I think also for organizations, you have to be aware of personality types that fit and align, right, with your organization, and make sure that you are selecting people that won't be such outliers, right? Or someone may say, wait, you're a diversity inclusion person. What are you saying? Well, what I'm saying is know what you're ready for.
Yeah, know what you're ready for. That's good. That's good.
And people have to know what they're ready for. And I think that, we have to have more conversation around how do people assess fit on the front end.
So leaning into that a little bit more, there's this conversation in this space around cultural add versus cultural fit. And so how do you reconcile the two and hold the middle?
So I always say fit is the F word of D&I, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it is literally the most subjective word that by definition has no meaning.
Absolutely.
Everybody think about that for a minute. It has no objective reality that you can put your finger on. It is absolutely personal opinion at all times. And I think it becomes the cesspool. If fit is the framework, it becomes the cesspool of bias.
Yeah.
And so I challenge that word fit very often, because basically it's just an okay word to say, do I like you or not? Right. And as Lenroy's saying, it's a code word. And if you have homogeneity on a team of other people who quote unquote fit with each other, then they'll always see lack of fit with someone who's different.
Right.
And I think that's part of the cycle, right, that organizations are going through. And then you have a bunch of people in an organization that are all the same, even if you have diversity on some of the other visuals. And there starts to become a mimicking. And then we just start recreating ourselves over and over again. And some organizations, that's what actually keeps them in the loop of not, it's like, wait, the numbers are increasing. Yeah, but you're hiring people with the same mindset. Or that are willing to ascribe to the same thing, or willing to suppress their voice and who they are just to get along because the company name may be XYZ. And so I think with young employees and young leaders, we have to start to have that conversation with them, and then definitely with leaders within organizations that have hiring and firing capabilities.
Yeah, no, lots of good chatter going on into the chat. So I want to shift a little bit, and I want you to tell us about your mask project.
Okay, it's cool.
What inspired you to create that?
So the mask project, I created some years ago, and it's connected to something I mentioned earlier. Anytime I would give a keynote, give a talk or anything, there'd always be people that, say, oh, Dr. C, can I talk to you for a second? And they kind of pull me to the corner to like, tell me a secret. What I'm thinking is a secret, but it's just like a truth, right? A truth, a lived experience. And I said, people aren't feeling comfortable sharing their narratives. And so I started an initiative where I started collecting those narratives of the experience of people wearing the mask at work and in life. I started off collecting Black women, and then I moved to women of color, and then I moved to everybody. And what I found with that is no matter what identity you have or whatever identity group you have, it's a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So let's even take the most, if we, use a privilege formula, right? Let's take a straight white male from upper class. Let's just stick to those three, right?
Mm-hmm.
That man also wears different masks in life, right?
True.
And so
Yeah.
any human decides to wake up and say, how am I going to present myself to the world? Right? So that's a human experience. But where it gets nuanced is when you have a stigmatized or a stereotyped identity, or identity that attaches to societal stigma. Now you're balancing just the basic human level and all of those categories that you have that may be there. And so it is an extra load. So I would very clearly say that mask wearing is a human dilemma, but the more barriers you have connected to your other identity groups, the harder it is.
Yeah.
And I think that is the piece that, even when we talk about privilege, people don't talk about. I've given talks and some say, well, Dr. Charles, that's not specific to people of color. Or that's not specific to women. Or that's not specific. I feel that way too. I said, oh, I'm absolutely sure you do. But if we talk about level and intensity, it absolutely is different. Absolutely. And part of equity is and part of privilege is being able to acknowledge that, yes, maybe, just maybe, your race has not, your race hasn't held you back from something or hasn't helped you, but guess what it hasn't done? It has not held you back.
Right.
And when I'm talking to allies and when I'm talking to others that sit in privileged identities, I'm very strong on that messaging. Yeah. So yes, maybe your whiteness or your straightness or your maleness, hasn't given you an extra foot, but I can tell you it hasn't hurt you in the societal context, right? And at a collective level. Absolutely. And that's usually a breakthrough point, for allies to understand, because I think it helps take away some of the defensiveness. And the flip side of that, right, is that members of stigmatized and stereotyped groups that can have there's just so many barriers and walls, I can't ever get through. I don't accept that ideology either.
Exactly. There's extremes on both ends. Yes.
Yes. I believe all of us have the ability to use active decisions, right? Use agency, use voice to navigate in our space. Because to believe we have no agency or no will or no ability to change, even if changing is simply leaving the organization that's running you into the ground, then guess what? That's choice and agency.
Yes.
Right? So no human is just sitting forced. I tell people this all the time, especially if I'm talking to friends, and this is kind of in our Black community space, if I'm being transparent here, and someone will say, oh, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could tell my boss this. We are free in America now, outside of the context of slavery. And I will say that to, I have a friend or two kind of laughing on it because I say that. I'm like, we are free now, right? And there's no situation where you can't take a day, or where you can't leave, or where you can't use your FMLA, or you can't, right?
Right. Don't feel stuck.
And so it sounds like extreme, but it's true. But I think a lot of some of that ancestral narrative says, just like women, will just be happy you have that job, take that and then see what comes next. There's this very be grateful, narrative that has been given to people of stigmatized or oppressed identities. And in this era and generation, we have to start to see people use voice. And again, just due to relevancy, Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, that's what they did.
Absolutely.
They said, I don't have to do this for you. I don't.
Yes.
And I'll still be the best, and I'll still get my endorsements, and I'll be alive, and I'll be well. And I think that in our regular workforce space, right, we have to be okay with that too. And, like I said, I'm just hoping that these two young women, that this message, just like Barack Obama, and this isn't about politics, but the presence of a first person of color president changed a generation.
Absolutely.
Right? Whereas for us, it was joke if someone said, oh, I'm gonna be president when I go to, Black people don't the basic reality that a Black person did become a president changes a whole generation of what's possible, separate from politics. I believe that these young people we're seeing in pop culture now are reframing a whole narrative.
I agree.
About what's possible to choose you.
I agree. And it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, it is.
so much to unpack. I do want to let the audience know that we are going to be shifting in just a few moments to take your questions, and you can place them into the chat, or we also want to give you a chance, if you feel so inclined, and we encourage it, for you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And maybe if it's not a question, it's just something you want to contribute to today's discussion. I want to talk about your journey, Dr. Charles, because, you know, academia, and then of course you've done your consulting and you're still in that space. You also spent some time doing this work within a corporate environment. So just give us a little bit of your journey and those experiences and how in which you feel like you have landed at a place to say, I want to be in this space doing it from a consulting capacity.
So, excuse me. So one of the biggest things for me, you know, and I think this comes from having an entrepreneurial mom who has been in 5 different industries, successful businesses across the board, is being okay with change, right? Even if you're working within an organization, to be okay with change and to follow what feels right based off of the gifts that you have. So very early in my career, like I'm relatively young for the stage of career that I have, but it's because I knew from undergrad I wanted to do D&I work before that was even like a thing.
Yeah.
Because what I was frustrated with, right? I was frustrated with hearing Black and brown people in my personal and family spaces complaining so much about work. I'm like, okay, like some of my family members are like the smartest people, the best people, like why aren't they happy at work? I'm like, something has to be happening in that space for all of these people to have this issue. And so I decided in between my undergrad and my MBA space that I wanted to get my PhD to find the answers to those questions. So I went straight through, went and got my PhD. I started my PhD program at 22 and studied race and gender and what came to be identity, what I then, you know, in the scholarly space, what that started to define itself as. And my first paper in my doctoral program, my first paper, I had the poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar called We Wear the Mask at the top of my first paper. Now, any academics know, like, we don't do poetry, right, in our scholarly papers, but that was how compelled I felt, because it was that poem that said, this is the issue. Like, this is the issue. People are masking themselves. Companies don't know what to do about it. And this is the problem. And my advisor, she said, we're scholars. We don't start things with poems at the top. I'm like, but doc, listen, I'm telling you, trust me on this. And we still chuckle to this day. She's like, you've built a whole career around your first paper. And it's because I just knew it to be true somewhere. So I would just suggest to anyone in any space, at any stage of career, trust your gut on your gifts to contribute. Right? Like, trust your guts on it. Like, people will say, oh, do you do a talk on this? I was like, I could talk on anything. I'm smart and I have my PhD. I said, but what it will always center back to is this core identity conversation and what it means to suppress and conceal who we are. And so I did that. I went into academia, and very early on, once I graduated with my PhD, Obama had become president. So there was all this conversation now around race and leadership, right? And race at work. And I took a lot of opportunities to speak and then consult and that type of thing. Typically in academia, you don't do that early. But again, my mom like literally woke me up and my grandmother woke me up every day singing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And I'm like, I am not a 20-something-year-old Black woman with a PhD with something to say, and I'm not going to say, right? And so I went that route. And so I started consulting and speaking very early in my career. And from 2009 up until, you know, just about this point, that's what I've done. I've balanced academia and I've balanced consulting. And then I've taken different detours as well. I've gone full-time on consulting, then I've leaned back into academia. I've had global leadership roles in corporate and then leaned back into consulting. Like, I have never felt like I was bound to a lane because the work is still the same. It's just a matter of it in what season of my life works best for me to do the same work, right? With the same gifts. And I use that word a lot because I don't think we take time enough as professionals to think about what our gifts are in a lane. There's a bunch of people out here talking about they're doing D&I consulting right now. And it's like, since when? Since George Floyd? Right?
Yeah.
Now,
right.
So for some, they're not qualified. For some, it's people who are qualified and now say this is the time.
Yeah.
But as someone that's been doing it my whole career, I have a good eye for what that looks like, right? I've seen friends go into organizations as chief diversity officers, and that wasn't the right fit for them. Not because they're not good or because they don't like it, but just because of this doesn't quite align for what I want now or what I want in the long term. Or people make decisions for financial reasons, right? To maximize their earning potential in a consulting entrepreneurial space. And some people don't know. And so they stay in between all the spaces. But if there's anything I can say, as I live my last year before I turn 40 in February, is that I know for sure my whole career, one thing has been consistent. I've been me, period, right? And then I've also given of my same gifts and contributed to organizations, whether it's 1 or 50 at any given one point in time. And so that is what authenticity looks like in action for me. For me to be good, be an Atira, no matter what space or lane I'm in, or in what mode I'm contributing my gifts into. Because I know no matter what space or lane I'm in, I'm teaching and I'm changing mindsets. So whether that's to 19-year-old students at a HBCU, 23-year-old predominantly white MBAs at FSU, whether that's with clients in the energy industry all the way into technology, whether it's being the head of diversity at a global luxury organization or being CEO of Charles Consulting Group. Like I don't change in those spaces. The spaces change around me, right? And I think we have to start to, like, that's what authenticity looks like in action, and being okay with the changes and the ebbs and flows, because people will have opinion about your track no matter what. Why she leave here? Why she stay here? Why she do that? Why she go here? Questions that need answers, but I have the answer for me, right?
Yeah.
And the universe continues to like align in rewarding me with what I do. And so that's kind of always been my positioning. And so if we're really talking about authenticity in action, that is my most honest answer I could give to what it looks like. Trusting yourself and being you no matter what around you is shifting.
I love that. You just said, I have the answer for me. And I backed away because my shirt says speak truth. And I am really centering myself around that message of speak truth. And I appreciate you sharing what authenticity in action looks like for you as we continue to engage in conversation today. I want to invite this community and give each of you agency to place into the chat. What does authenticity in action look like for you? So let's just kind of share that as we continue to engage. I do want to invite questions at this time. I have some other questions for Dr. Charles, but I realize that our time is going to wind down quickly, and I dare not give each of you the equal opportunity to engage Dr. Charles and this entire community with your questions. And so, Mark, I see that your hand is raised. Go for it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. White. Hello, Dr. Charles. Thank you so much for being here today and for this amazing conversation. I had a moment in my life where something clicked for me, where the mask fell off. What was that moment in your life? What was the moment when you said, I can't afford to wear this mask any longer? If you don't mind, I know it's really personal, so I don't know if you mind sharing.
It's what we're talking about, right? I would probably say about 4 or 5 years ago, my business was skyrocketing. I had 3 kids at that point, twin boys included. My mom was sick with kidney disease. My brother was giving her a kidney. Life was full. And I was still teaching full time. And I started having anxiety attacks. And I didn't know where that came from. I'm like, I teach people how to deal with anxiety and stress. Like, what do you mean I'm having anxiety attacks? And so I did the work I needed to do to figure out what the source of that anxiety was, and the source of that stress was connected to a variety of things, right? Like childhood stuff, workload things. But the biggest thing that my therapist told me in that moment, she said, Atira, you've been trained and rewarded to be an overfunctioning machine. And much of what happens in your life is rewarded for being an overfunctioning machine, but it's burning your circuits out. And at that moment, I realized that it was okay to be messy human Atira and not perfection, fast track, always successful, things are always great Atira. And so I released the mask of perfection, of hyper positivity, of, you know, all of those things. And it's just like, look, one day you'll catch that Atira and another day you'll catch another Atira, but it's all Atira. And I started using boundaries and putting up barriers in my life to block the things that were creating the angst or that were rewarding me for being over functioning. And that's when I started making different types of decisions in my life. So that's when I decided, okay, holding down a full 6-figure consulting business and a 6-figure faculty position is too much. I'm on the road too much, and something has to give, right? And so that's when I decided to leave academia. Around COVID time, one of my clients said, hey, you want to come in and be the head of D&I for us? I said, okay, cool. Right now, there's things in my life occurring that are having me transition back into my consulting space as I make that decision. And so I'm okay with change, whereas before I was not okay with change or ambiguity or uncertainty. Now I feel comfortable finding my space in that and knowing that all will be well because I'm well, right? And that's probably the biggest life transition in my adult life that I've taken.
Wow. Okay, so I'm looking for raised hands. Are there other questions at this time that anyone would like to present to Dr. Charles, or again, just to contribute to the conversations that are occurring for the benefit of this community? Feel free just to unmute, or again, you can use the raise hand feature and I'm happy to call on you. And I'm expanding my view so that I can have, okay, great. I see your hand, Christina. Go for it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles and Dr. White. I would love to hear, and you spoke a little bit about it when you were answering Mark's question, but I think that so oftentimes we have masks and we aren't even been able to identify that they are masks because we've been using them for so long that they've almost become like subsets of our personality or alter egos or things like that people may describe them as. And I wonder, I know you mentioned therapy and being able to, you know, unpack those things and rediscover those things, but for those of us who maybe are still trying to identify what those masks are and to be able to really fully live in our authentic selves, what advice or processes would you recommend for that?
So the biggest one for me would be to do pulse checks on where you're at. We as humans are super delusional, y'all. Like we are also masterful screenwriters of storylines that are not always rooted in reality, where we are painting ourselves as the victor, overpainting ourselves as the victor, or sometimes overpainting ourselves as the victim. And I think the first step is to figure out where we're at. Right? Like what bucket are we in? So because that then tells us what we need to figure out and what we need to do, right? Is it that we have some personal, emotional, mental health, physical health, family life things that we need to deal with? Or is it work, literally external to you, right? I've had seasons like that season I told you all about years ago when I figured that part out around my anxiety. That was internal work. Right. At these transitions and changes in my current life, much of it is external. Like I'm good, right? Yeah. But other things around me are changing and shifting that say, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to do X, Y, Z right now. Right. And so you have to be able to look at your life landscape and just say, who am I? Where am I? And where do I need to go? And then connect those dots because it's different for all of us. But two things I focus on a lot is internal versus external. Like what is me right now and what is outside of me? Because what tends to happen with super smart people, we internalize so much. We internalize so much. And I just don't internalize things anymore. Because my thing is if it's internal, then it's real and I will deal with it. And me and my therapist, she's the homie, I love her. And my mom and my circle of sister friends are amazing too. But when it's external, then it's just strategy time. All right. Like let's move some variables around to make the circumstance what works best for me in this time and in this season. But you also have to be ready for like public opinion.
Yeah.
But you also can't take it to heart. And I think we think about peanut galleries way too much.
Yeah.
You know,
That's important. Thank you so much.
no problem.
That's a great question, Christina. Okay, so we have some time left, but it is winding down. I want to give others an opportunity to share your question or your commentary for Dr. Charles. I'm also paying attention to the chat as well, in case some of you are placing your questions there. So while people maybe are thinking about what they want to bring to the conversation, how do you address self-care? What does self-care for Dr. Charles look like?
Truth. Right? Truth. Having difficult conversations with myself and challenging myself in ways that nobody else can. Self-care also looks like taking time. Like I have some friends on the call, they'll know I'll be at a beach in a minute. Like I will shut all things down and be at a beach in a minute. I'm at one now. Hiding in a conference room, doing this iPad Zoom. But I take time unapologetically. Remember, that connects back to not being concerned with the peanut gallery. Says like my sons are with their dad right now at his house. My daughter's spending time with her grandmother, and I'm at the beach having a lovely time, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Right? So you have to find your comfort with doing you and figuring out what that is, like what restores you. So for me, I'm big on energy. Like you guys can tell I have a big personality. I talk with a lot of energy. So when I do this every day, all day, it can deplete me.
Absolutely.
So I have to figure out what restores me back. And that's something different. For me, it's being social, right? When I engage with people that I care about, it refuels me. Some people are the opposite. It's no, I need to be home for a couple of days to refuel myself back, right? And so it depends. Back to that original question Christina asked, like, what do? You have to know you to know what's best. Because if someone says, oh, go on a beach trip for a week, you're like, this is just too much energy. This tired me out. Then someone could tell me, Atira, you need time by yourself. No, I don't. Because me and Netflix, we've had it over the last year, right? I need to be with my people in a room that are vaccinated, right? And so that's my current stage of life, right? And so, self-care looks like a lot of things, but the takeaway word would be what restores me. And we all haven't been given time. I mean, I was mid-30s before I asked myself that true question. And so we all have to ask that. And it changes with time.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Awesome. So Lynn Roy, I see that your hand is raised, and so you have the floor now.
Thank you. Hey, great conversation. Very much resonating where I'm at right now, just this week. And I
love it.
That had done a couple of interviews, but one of the areas I'm interested in, and you've touched on it, and so you may say, Lynn Roy, you weren't listening. No, it's just that both of you can answer this question if possible. I've been looking universities and then corporate America, very select though, and then some nonprofits to make that pivot into this space, and been very busy over the last year to do that. Only within probably the last 45, 60 days that I thought the consulting area is an area, and some people, you should start your own business, don't want to do that. But rather joining a team. What are some of the pros, cons, insight that either of you can give? Because I've thought about it, and not a pitch for anyone here, but just that's something that both of you can give some insight to if you can. Appreciate it.
Well, I would say don't ever apologize for a pitch, right? And I'm going to say that very clearly, because one of the biggest things with deciding what part of consulting you want to get into, if you want to get into another business or starting your own, the hardest part for me at the beginning was sales. Because to me, it's like, I just have good ideas. I want to help people. And my mom, who's a saleswoman, is like, you didn't mention your book enough in that talk. Or you didn't mention what's happening with this TED Talk. This link lives out there. Like, you need to mention it 5 times in everything you do. And now that was my mom, right? Doing that. And she's been the best mentor I've had. But don't ever feel all that conversation I had about gifts. I will stand on a mountaintop any day and tell everybody what I'm great at. because that's who else will? If we even connect that back to the original conversation of use your voice. So I just wanted to say that, like, talk your stuff, you know what I mean? And let people know what lane you want to get into, because doors can't open if you don't do that. And that's just kind of a general message for everybody. But I would say in regard to client life, I mean, I could be very honest. I hate the back office part of dealing with a consulting business and having my own. If I could just wake up, do what I'm doing right now and go back to sleep and wake up and do this and someone else handles all the other things, then fine. I had some trust issues earlier on in my consulting. So I was like, no, I'll do the back office too. Now I will outsource all the things, okay? Because it creates tension for me. I delay on it. I have a friend on this call right now that I've collaborated on a project with months ago. I still haven't sent her my invoice yet. Why? Because it just is the thing that always falls to the end of my, like the back office stuff falls to the end of the list. So you have to know where your strengths are and your weaknesses are, or which even if it's not a strength or weakness, what you like and what you don't like. So if it is that you want to train and facilitate and develop strategy, but you don't want to deal with the other things, then find a consulting company right now that's looking for that thing. Someone who wants to be in this space, but actually likes the back office side. Maybe there's a support role that you may be looking for, right? But to be in the space, right? And so you have to figure out what is it you want to do and don't want to do, even in the lane. You may have to ask yourself, okay, if I want to go internal to a company, do I want to go internal to any company to do the work? Here's what I can tell you. I've worked with a number of clients in a variety of relationship structure ways. For me, I always knew if I ever went internal, it would have to be to a company that was culture facing, right? And so when I was the head of D&I at Moët Hennessy, that's what that was for me. Right? It was culture facing. It sat at the intersection. It had a lot of the things that if I'm going to be in one house, there are a lot of other things that align with where I'm at, right? Would I necessarily want to be the chief diversity officer of a company that makes little plastic widgets? No, I probably wouldn't, right? And so I knew that for myself. And so you have to say, okay, well, do I like companies that are service-based or are product-based? Or if I'm going to be a head of diversity, is there an ability to work internally and externally? Will this head of diversity role be more HR focused, or will it be more market, consumer engagement focused? Will it be more heavy training, or will it be more heavy strategy development, paper writing, research development, research insights? And then guess what? If you do want to do consulting, take all the projects, right, that can work, and then you bring in the people that have the sweet spots in each of those lanes and outsource it, pay your people, keep your money in your community and your family and your friends, then keep it moving, right? There's that too. I know that oral communication is where I feel best at work, right? I believe that's where my gifts transfer. I have a client tomorrow who needs a 50-page paper on something. And I took it, but I know I'm like outsourcing it to someone who I think is one of the smartest beings on earth to do it, because I don't like that part as much. So I'll lean into what I like. So I hope that that's helpful, as you kind of think about all those things.
That was amazing. That was an amazing response. So we're running out of time, but there's one question that remains. And Dr. Charles, you did touch on this in a bit, but there may be more that you would like to say, and then we're going to close out. But this question comes from Zoe. And her question is, how do you protect your energy with clients, needy clients that turn out to be not aligned with your values? And a lot of that you started to address with Lynn Roy's question.
So I would say, going back to something I said earlier about friendship mattering to me, I'm big on personal relationship with at least one person in an organization that I'm working with, because I need trust to be built. Mm-hmm. I need them to know that sometimes we're just talking as Atira and such, not necessarily as consultant and client, because there's some hard truth conversations that sometimes have to be had. And if there's anything that doesn't work doing D&I work in the consulting space, is having to have a client and a project that you're working on and then be walking on eggshells. Mm-hmm. The topic is eggshell enough. So if you don't have someone that you could really like unmask with and sit and have the difficult conversations, and you know that it is just really human to human, it's hard. So I would suggest like having, and I don't even want to use the word an ally, It's like someone has to become, you know, that colleague, that friendship level of colleague, as you're entering in. That's something that matters. I also think you have to be, there's two things with this. I can tend to overwork on a project if I love the people and love the project. And then I'm like, hold up, this scope was 25 hours. We're at 40. I didn't invoice them. I didn't tell them I was. So now I just got to sit at this point. But I was enjoying the process, but that wasn't good business. Then the other side of it is, don't be afraid to charge.
Yeah.
Charge for your time. If it creates more headache than the original conversation and scope, if things have gotten to be more than what they are, charge for it and let them know, because guess what? People will pay for what they value. So if they're not going to pay for it, they don't value it. So if they don't value it, why should it be creating challenge for you in your work life? I will send a referral to a client in a minute if it doesn't align or it's just not working based off of, you know, them not valuing the work, or there just being some discrepancy around, because people assume this D&I work is just, oh, just show up, talk about nice things, make people feel good and go home. They don't see the 45 hours you're putting into one thing. They don't see the pillow talk with yourself, stressed and anxious because you're battling being who you are. Could you imagine being a Black woman through this last year doing D&I work and still having to show up as if that other part of you sometimes is not leading? It was a lot. This last year was a lot, y'all, for women of color, D&I people. And I'm just speaking from that identity group because that's who I am and what I am. We're having to manage being the like everything to everybody in our professional consulting spaces and workspaces, and then not having time to figure out what it means to be us navigating the world that we've been in, right? And so you have to protect that, because that goes back to prioritizing yourself and what self-care looks like. And I'm at a pace in my life now where no dollar is worth my lack of wellness. And everyone can find that
Thank
space.
you.
I love that. I love that. I think that's a perfect note to end on. I also want to respect that you have a flight to catch, and we are so grateful that you took time out of your getaway to be able to join us. I want to thank each of our participants that have been a part of today's conversation. If this resonated with you, then when we share out the email this afternoon with the replay, please share it with others in your network. Let us know what your thoughts and reflections are. We look forward to seeing you again next Friday, Eastern Standard Time, 11 to 12 noon, where we will be back here for another Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we will be welcoming Jennifer Brown as our guest co-host. Thank you, Dr. Charles. We are better off having spent this time with you, and we're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.